Thank you, Adam, for that kind introduction and also the honour of kicking off today's event. So, as Adam has said, I'm Shell's Energy Transition Manager in the UK, and you may be wondering what that means. Well, it's my job to ensure that Shell's business strategies in the UK and our plans and our actions are all supporting and aligned with Shell's net zero targets, and that they support and are aligned with the UK's net zero targets. Now, many people ask me why, having had a successful career in low carbon energy, I would choose to return to oil and gas. And, after all, oil and gas is the major part of the problem when it comes to climate change. And I can tell you it was a fairly difficult decision. It was not really going to do my street cred any good to return to the oil and gas industry. But, and it's a big but, I firmly believe that this industry and the people within it can be part of the solution. I was convinced that I could personally make a bigger difference by being in the inside of that industry rather than on the outside. So a question that I frequently return to is, are we, and am I, doing enough to genuinely be part of the solution? And I'm going to come back to this, so hold that thought. So I've said that my job is to ensure that Shell's business strategies in the UK and our plans and actions are all aligned to net zero, both Shell's targets and the UK's. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that and the approach we've taken. So Shell's strategy, which is called Powering Progress, sets out how we intend to accelerate the transition of our businesses to net zero emissions by 2050 in step with society. And it has four main goals, and they are delivering value to our shareholders, accelerating the transition to net zero emissions, powering lives and livelihoods through our products and our activities, and through creating an inclusive society, and respecting nature. And this strategy is designed to create value for our shareholders, for our customers, and for wider society. Now, that's pretty high level stuff. So I thought it would be helpful to translate a little bit more specifically how that kind of works at a country level. And I'm going to focus on the goal of achieving net zero because that's the area I work in, and explain our UK strategy for doing so. And I'll start by summarising that we believe that our strategies and plans can reduce our emissions in the UK in support of Shell's targets and also the UK government. And there are four key priorities for us to achieve this. Now, the first of these is to tackle our own emissions, so-called scopes 1 and 2. And today, these emissions amount to roughly 0.5% of the UK's total greenhouse gas emissions, and are primarily from our oil and gas production facilities in the North Sea and our onshore gas processing plants. Now, we could, of course, reduce these emissions by selling our assets, which would reduce Shell's emissions, but I think we can all agree it would do absolutely nothing to reduce the UK's emissions. We could also just stop production before the end of the field life. But the UK is not dissimilar to most countries in that it is heavily dependent on oil and gas today, and stopping UK production would just make the UK more dependent upon imports, often with a higher carbon intensity as well as security of supply risks, as we've seen recently. So it makes sense to continue to produce UK oil and gas for as long as the UK demand exceeds supply. But having said that, business as usual production is not okay. And even though our emissions are a small part of the UK's, we need to play our part and reduce our emissions from the production and processing of oil and gas. And I'm going to come back to this. I first, though, just want to touch on our other three priorities because these are for reducing our emissions related to our customers, so-called scope 3. Now, customers are at the heart of what we do. But well over 90% of the emissions associated with Shell comes from our customers, both businesses and individuals. So we have 3 priorities to support our customers' decarbonisation journeys. And these are low carbon mobility, power, and CCS and hydrogen. And I'll just say a few words on each of these. So I'm going to start with mobility. 25% of all UK emissions are from road transport. And we're investing in the charging infrastructure needed to support the switch to electric vehicles, as well as advocating for more rapid change, such as when we called on the UK government to bring forward the ban on the sales of new internal combustion engine cars from 2040 to 2030, a policy which the government subsequently adopted. But we want to support our customers charging at all places they want to charge, at their homes, at the businesses, at destinations such as supermarkets, on street, and at with ultra rapid charge points at our service stations. Later this year, we intend to open our first EV hub at Fulham in London. And this used to be a petrol station, but we've removed the petrol and the diesel and are replacing this with 10 150 kilowatt chargers. We aim to grow all of these charging market segments and to grow them rapidly. And just to give 2 examples, we intend to have over 50,000 on-street chargers by 2025. And we want to have 5,000 rapid charge points at our forecourts and destinations in the same period. So moving on from mobility, our next focus area is power. Here we want to build an integrated power business spanning renewables, trading and supply of clean energy to both business and consumers. And we want to grow our customer base so that we can support our customers in decarbonising. So today, Shell Energy delivers 100% certified renewable electricity to UK homes and businesses. Our subsidiary Line Jump optimises routes to market for customers with generating assets or electricity consuming assets, such as Europe's biggest battery, which is at Minety in southwest England. And we also support renewable generators with power purchase agreements, such as the Bradenstoke solar power plant in Wiltshire and the world's largest offshore wind farm at Dogger Bank. It is no secret that we're also actively looking to invest in solar and offshore wind in the UK ourselves, as we have elsewhere. And we recently signed an agreement with 2 solar developers for 800 megawatts. And we're also hoping to be successful in the latest Scottish offshore wind licensing round with our partner, Scottish Power Renewables. So I've covered mobility and power. The next priority area for us to work with our customers is on CCS and hydrogen. Scenarios, whether these are Shell's, whether they're the UK's Climate Change Committee or the IPCC or the IEA, they all show that CCS is a necessity, not an option, particularly for hard to abate sectors. Now, I'm not going to say too much on this because my colleague Siri Crouch is speaking tomorrow. But here in the UK, we're a partner in 3 of the UK's CCS clusters. In the Northern Endurance Partnership in the east of England, in Acorn in Scotland, where we're the technical developer, and in the South Wales Industrial Cluster. So, 4 priorities in the UK: reducing our own emissions, low carbon mobility, developing an integrated power business, and CCS and hydrogen. And if we're successful in these, then we can reduce our own emissions and those of our customers in line with the reduction in emissions required by the UK to meet its targets. So I want to now return to reducing our emissions from oil and gas, particularly given the audience today. And although these emissions are small compared to those of our customers, it is incredibly important for the reputation of our industry that we do this. And without this, frankly, we cannot be a genuine part of the solution to climate change. In the UK, we've made an industry-wide commitment to achieve a 50% reduction in North Sea oil and gas emissions by 2030 and to become a net zero basin by 2050. And every year, the industry will report on this as a whole to show progress being made. Now, reducing emissions from oil and gas production requires three types of activities: changes to operations, reducing flaring and venting, and major capital investment programs such as electrification of offshore power or carbon capture and storage at our onshore gas plants. And I'd like to give just a couple of examples of ways in which we're doing so. So earlier this year, Shell undertook the rewheel of 2 compressors on our Gannet platform in the central North Sea. This reduced overall power demand for the platform and resulted in a 25% reduction in CO2 emissions overall from that particular platform. And an example we're working towards is that we're working with partners on the feasibility of electrifying a number of platforms in the central North Sea. As well as working with industry partners, we also work with the government and with regulators to drive change. And I think it's just worth touching on the role of regulators. Some of you may have heard about so-called climate compatibility checks. These are a new regulatory checkpoint being introduced in the UK to ensure that decisions that are being taken are aligned with the UK's net zero targets. We've also heard at COP about new methane targets to which more than 80 countries have signed up to. And a global coalition of energy regulators was formed to help regulators around the world to collaborate. These initiatives will undoubtedly lead to tighter regulation. And further, the UK government at COP26 announced that most UK listed companies will be required to publish an energy transition plan, showing how they intend to hit climate targets in line with the UK's targets. And these plans will be submitted, submitted for external scrutiny to ensure that they're not spin or greenwash. As an industry, we should not consider these actions as threats. External scrutiny, like I've just been talking about, is not something to be afraid of. We should be using this scrutiny to challenge ourselves to meet the highest standards. The standards that society expects from us, and the standards that support us in being part of the solution. But the role of our industry goes far beyond continuing to provide the secure and resilient supply of fossil fuels needed throughout the energy transition. We have much more to offer. And here in the UK, our industry is working in partnership with the government through something we call the North Sea Transition Deal, to transform the sector, to retain the upstream skills and the capabilities and supply chains which are absolutely vital to delivering the energy transition, particularly in emerging low carbon sectors such as carbon capture and storage and hydrogen. So I'd like to conclude by returning to my very first point. We know that our products and therefore our industry is part of the problem of climate change. But are we doing enough to genuinely be part of the solution? Do we have ambitions and targets? Are these aligned to country goals or the Paris Agreement? Are our ambitions and targets translated into strategies and plans? And are we taking the action to deliver against these plans? Are we open to partnering with our competitors as well as our customers? And are our policy and advocacy positions completely aligned with delivering net zero? And if not, what can we, and by we, I mean me and you, what can we do about it? I think there can be a tendency to think that there is nothing that we can individually do, or that we need to work on an abatement project or in an energy transition team or on carbon capture and storage to play a role here. But I would argue that we all have a role to play. And whatever your role, you can contribute to reducing the emissions in your part of your business. It is not okay to do nothing. And please, don't be a bystander in this. Be a part of the solution and be proud of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo. That was not only insightful. I like that last line you used about don't do nothing, or don't just stand by and do nothing, because I think people have this preconception of anything to do with energy transition, they've got to do so much towards it. But even the little things, I think, count. So thank you very much. That was a wonderful way to open the event. It's very interesting to see the evolving role of an oil and gas company in a net zero future, because I think this is much more different going forward now than it was 3 or 4 years ago. So just a couple of questions I'd like to ask you as part of what you're doing at Shell. You obviously mentioned UK. How do you see the UK compared with other countries when transitioning to a low carbon economy?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So I think the UK is one of the leading countries in its energy transition journey, and it is leading in certain aspects of it, such as offshore wind. Actually, also, I think it led in very much in getting coal off the power system by having a supplementary carbon price on top of the emissions trading scheme. But I think, and actually, that's probably kind of leads me on to where I think the UK leads most, because I think it leads really in the development of policy and regulation. And we can look at things like the Paris Agreement, which is an agreement supported by 5 yearly sort of resetting of targets, although now actually accelerated to kind of every year. And in many respects, the UK's Climate Change Act was a forerunner to that. The first legally binding target for a developed country. So I think probably in regulation and policy, the UK is going to show leadership. And I mentioned things like climate compatibility checks, and the fact that most listed companies are going to have to issue an energy transition plan. And I would expect other countries to look at what the UK government is doing in policy terms, in regulation, and to learn from those, both what works and what doesn't work. So very much expect to see some of the things happening in the UK appear in other countries as well.
It's a good point. And you mentioned some of the other energy mixes. Obviously, Siri's going to be speaking tomorrow, which you also mentioned in your welcome. We have a panel tomorrow, which is on hydrogen versus electrification, a bit of a battle. And it's clear that the energy mix is going to be made up of a few renewable components. There's no silver bullet. We know that. We're aware of that. I'm interested to hear your views on it, actually. What are your views on the different energy mixes? Because there's so many of them being talked about at the moment. You've got CCUS having a hell of a lot of press recently. But what's sort of your take on hydrogen, electrification and these parts?
Yeah, so obviously I mentioned both electrification and hydrogen as being important priorities for Shell in the UK. But I suppose I don't really see it as a competition between them, because fundamentally they will play different roles in the energy system. So I think my expectation is that electrification probably will lead to electricity being somewhere maybe even in excess of 70% of energy supply in a net zero future. But that still leaves the 30%, which is difficult to electrify. And that's where the technologies like CCS and hydrogen and also biofuels come in. So thinking about the role for hydrogen, in fact, it's probably worth saying an ex-colleague of mine, Jeremy Bentham, who used to head our scenarios team, he used to refer to hydrogen by coining an old Heineken ad that perhaps people based in the UK will remember. And he'd say that hydrogen reaches the parts that electrons cannot reach. And for me, that's the way to think about it. So in heavy duty transport, in parts of industry, in peaking power, and in, well, maybe, we'll see, but having a role to play in home heating as well.
I can't. That's a very good phrase. That is. I just maybe reminisce, but that's yeah. It's a good point. I think there's going to be challenges laying ahead with what the renewables is going to contribute. So obviously the event, I was very keen to have you open because of your role. As you know, the event also, a big part of it is on technology and innovation and how that works within the sector. What role do you see technology playing in the role, let's say, in helping decarbonisation? Because we see that a lot now in different events, in different forums, about how technology is helping, with the use of data and sort of analytics. But what is your take on this?
Yeah, so technology, of course, is absolutely essential to delivering the energy transition. And in fact, Ben van Beurden, our CEO, said last week that the energy transition is probably the single greatest technology revolution that mankind will have experienced. I think there's a tendency to think that technology is all about R&D, and it isn't. For me, it's about implementing technology. It's about scaling technology now. Technologies that are still in the labs are probably not going to have impact pre-2050, if you think of things like fusion energy. But as you said, the role of digitalization is huge. And, I like the phrase, what you don't measure, you can't manage. I think when we think of our emissions, there's still quite a lot of our emissions that we don't, we calculate them, we don't necessarily measure them. So I think technology has a significant role to play in helping us manage and understand our emissions and our abatement options better. But of course, technology helps us in many other ways as well. It can help us find so-called advantaged barrels. Barrels that are low cost and low carbon. And technology also helps us with our customers' transformation journeys. So we're using AI, for example, to help us pick the sites for EV charge points. We use digitalization in the virtual power plants that we use to manage people's generating and consumption assets, things like batteries. So I think digitalization has a huge role to play, and we're probably really only scratching the surface of what we can do with it.
Yeah, I believe that it's still quite embryonic. It's still quite early days, but it's a very good point you made about what you're doing to apply in other parts of the ecosystem as well. So one last point, because I could ask a few more questions, but we've got to go to the opening panel. But I would like to leave one last point with you, or I would like you to maybe leave a final word. What would you describe as the most significant component in this whole journey of energy transition? Because we talk about different variables, but you personally, Jo, what do you think is going to make this work?
So I've talked about quite a lot of things and the contribution this industry can make. We've talked about technology. We've obviously got significant financial clout. We've talked about partnerships and customers. But ultimately, the single biggest thing this industry has to offer is its people. We have the skills, we have the experiences, the capabilities. But more importantly, I think and I hope that we have the passion and the desire to really be part of the solution and to make the change happen that needs to happen. So, I'll finish where I started, which is that we must all be part of the solution to climate change.
That's a fantastic line to finish on. Jo, thank you very much. It's been an honour having you welcome our event. So many thanks for that, and we speak again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.